Welcome, everyone. It is 5:38 on Monday, April 17th. Welcome to the last CSI meeting, at least the last scheduled CSI meeting for this academic year. Would somebody like to make a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting? Okay. Maybe we should say it. Misty, you got it, or you want everybody to say their name before they make the motion, just to make it easier for you?
If I forget, I'll ask.
Okay, all right, so you got that. Everybody in favor of accepting tonight's agenda?
Yes.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? Okay, moving on. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes from our March 14th meeting?
I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Belle. Second?
I can second.
Thanks. Tamar. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes for the March 14th meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Abstain? Okay, so we are ready for our strategic plan refresh presentation.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you for letting me jump into this meeting, and thank you, Mr. Fisher, for helping us with audio. And we're going to jump in and give you some updates on our work for strategic plan refresh. And so we wanted to start off with just a quick introduction for who we are as Education Elements, and I'll introduce my teammates as well here on the next slide. But we're a national education consulting company. We work around the country with districts, schools, and states, mostly in strategic planning and personalized learning, so all the way from the state level down to the classroom. And you can see we have 12 years experience, and we're excited to be working with Lee County in terms of the strategic planning refresh. In terms of our team, my name is Chris. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and these are my two colleagues who have been working with Lee County leaders as well. There is Lauren Schulten, who lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and then Justin DeLeon, who lives in Miami, Florida. So from a high level, we wanted to just update you all on what we are trying to accomplish. And so the next couple slides, we broke down sort of a vision for our work with Lee County and our goals for the next few months. And so you can see we have three main goals, and I'll give you all a chance to digest these goals on your own. But from a high level, we're really trying to jump in and update the mission, vision, and values to represent the broader community. So that includes the board, the superintendent, student, staff, and then all of other community members in Lee County. And then using that information, we are going to refresh the strategic plan, really focus in on priority areas, objectives, and metrics. And then the third piece is supporting the cabinet and the people at the district level who are going to be implementing that plan and making sure they have what they need to be successful. This visual breaks down how we've been communicating with Lee County leaders in terms of a strategic plan and the different components that make it up. And you can see at the top is where we started with the mission and vision, and we're working our way down and talking about values, priorities, and how those are connected to those day-to-day and weekly actions, including objectives and initiatives and projects. And you can see some guiding questions here that we've kept front and center during our work, and will continue to do so over the next few months. And to just clarify a couple key pieces of what this project is and what it is not, we like to capture these descriptors here to just make sure there's a clear sense of what we're trying to accomplish. And you can see on the left, some things we're trying to do are, like we said, a strategic plan refresh. We are structuring our meetings so that there's reflection and adapting as much as possible. We're trying to prioritize initiatives and priorities to make sure people are clear on what to do next. And we're helping to facilitate and set that strategic direction. Some things that we're not focused on, you can see on the right, is we're not building a new plan. We're not trying to add anything or make things more complex, not expanding and not defining any tactics. And in terms of our role, Lauren, Justin, and myself and the Education Elements team, these are just the four key components of our work that you can see that are gonna have informed what we are doing for the next few months. So our goal is to act as a guide through each phase, making sure that we're defining a clear purpose and key activities for the different constituents that we're meeting across Lee County. We're facilitating internal and external meetings designed within each phase. We're providing targeted support based on the needs of Lee County community members and meeting with different folks from across the district. And towards the end of our work, we're going to summarize our findings along each phase and make sure people are clear on a final product and any key pieces that are needed. So I'll pause there. Before we jump into some further updates, any high-level questions, wonderings from folks?
No, I think we're all set.
Yep.
I didn't see anybody.
Okay. The next thing we wanted to update you on is just the engagement roadmap. So here we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how we're actually doing this work and then jump at more of a surface level. So with that, here is a breakdown of how we're engaging Lee County community and Lee County staff.
Chris?
And so you can see we're using a lot of survey data from
Chris, you know,
across.
just, I think you're already aware of this, but we can't read at all that one side of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
It's just in
Okay.
general, it's kind of small, but that one particular graphic visual to the left side, it's basically like small lines for us on our side. I just want to make sure you knew that. I think that you are aware of that, it was just a visual to show.
Can you see on the right though?
The
data on
right-hand
the
side, to be able to view it,
No.
it's pretty tiny.
That's-
No.
Is there any
Can
way
we
to
blow
make your
that up?
screen, like right now it's showing up in your browser, so your browser's like taking your normal, and making it half the size. Is there any way to increase that?
Yeah, give me one moment. Let me see if this helps. Okay, resharing now. Let me see if it's, let me know if it's a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
Much better, yep. You're good.
All right. Okay, cool. Thanks for the feedback and yeah, continue to let me know if anything you can't see so I can clarify. But this is just some of the breakdown of how we're engaging, like I said, with Lee County community and staff. And you can see, focus on the right. I know the text on the left is probably pretty small, but on the right, it breaks down. We're using a large amount of survey data that's been gathered across the district. You can see the breakdown there. Survey responses from secondary students, elementary school students, family responses, and educators. And all of that is the accreditation data that Ken has provided us. You can also see upcoming, similar to what we're doing right now, we're engaging with different groups across the district, and we are looking for feedback, particularly on mission, vision, and values of Lee County, and feedback on priority areas. And on an upcoming slide, I'm going to break down how we're going to gather that feedback from you all and other members of the community using a survey. And then some things we've already completed that we've mentioned is we've completed a lot of interviews with leaders from around the county. We spoke to the 7 board members and asked them some key questions. We've spoken to the superintendent multiple times, and we have spoken to chiefs and directors, and we're planning to meet with them in person the next few weeks during our next retreat. Speaking of our next retreat, here's just a roadmap, sort of short term, of some upcoming things that we have related to our work. And just to orient you to a couple things here, we had our first board retreat last week, and it was with the school board and superintendent. And we have another board retreat coming up in May, where we'll bring in the cabinet and we'll have a much larger group. And that'll be coming up May 9th, like I said, with that larger group. And then in June, we're gonna take all this work, provide a readout report that can be used to make any updates on priorities or initiatives for that strategic plan refresh. I'll pause here again. Any high-level questions about one, where we're jumping in and engaging with the community and staff of Lee County, or our roadmap and looking forward? Any high-level questions about that?
Everybody else set? Okay, looks like we're ready to keep going.
Perfect. So wanted to dive in and just let you know about our board retreat last week and just give you some key insight into what was discussed. I know some of you may have jumped into some of that information or even watched the retreat as it was happening, but wanted to provide these details nonetheless. And so the outcomes from our first board retreat, we broke them down here, 3 big ones. Number 1, we reflected and discussed the current state data and interview readout data with board members and the superintendent. We began to collaborate the guiding vision, mission, and values within Lee County. And we started to align on some priority areas, and our plan is to continue that conversation when we bring in the cabinet during that May 9th board retreat, which is coming up in a few weeks. And during our first board retreat, we actually spent probably almost half the time jumping into data. And we had a lot of conversations, a lot of rich conversations regarding the data you see here on this slide. We focused on student achievement data, stakeholder surveys that I mentioned, and then we jumped in a lot and talked about the interview and perception data that we had gathered before the board retreat. And so that interview data was, like I said, with board members, the superintendent, and the chiefs. And we wanted to share some of that here with you all. And this is the same data that we shared last week with the superintendent and with the board. And you can see some of the high-level trends that we pointed out. And like I said, feel free to let me know if you have questions. I'll pause at certain points to see if there's anything you want to dive into deeper. But here's just a breakdown of those interviews. We carried these interviews over the span of about a month, and it was 23 total interviews with 7 chiefs, 7 board members, and 9 cabinet members. And really the main focus of these conversations were to just gather feedback across different community members and different leaders across the district, and we were able to certainly do that. Some of the questions we asked folks when we interviewed them are here on the screen. I won't go through every question, but just point out a few. We focused on talking about what values live within the district, what do we see happening across the district, across schools, across the district office, whatever role that person carried. And then we talked about what are the issues facing Lee County, what's most prevalent given everything that's happened over the past few years, and we got some varying responses depending on the person and the role. And so the high-level themes from these conversations, we really bucketed these themes into 4 different components. A lot of folks talked about staffing and teacher and staff shortages, and then making sure that we have leadership training in place and we're prioritizing our leaders at both the school level and the district level. The other bucket was operations, improving internal systems across the district, whether it be at the district leadership level, school level, and all the way down into the classroom. And then making sure through all of that, there's transparency and accountability. Another big theme you see here in red was student achievement. Most everyone brought that up in some way, shape, or form, talking about her early childhood and making sure that our graduation and career readiness program is continuing to be a priority for the district moving forward. And then in the green, climate and culture, this was almost across the board with every person we interviewed talking about growth and diversity and building trust across all levels. And like I said, it's connected to that transparency and accountability that we saw in that blue bucket. Pause real quick there for any clarity or questions on the slides that I shared. I am going to show you 2 more slides on strengths and growth areas, but any questions about the slides so far?
Anybody?
Well,
Okay.
I'm keeping my powder dry to the end. I do have some comments,
Yes.
but I wanna see how we land this whole concept.
There will be questions, just be prepared.
I'm ready, and I gotta get my screen somehow disappeared on me, give me one moment. Okay, is my screen back?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, cool. So just some themes, drawing out some themes that we saw from the different groups. These were things that these different subgroups said were particularly going well. And we found it interesting to break this down by the roles. So like I said, we interviewed board members, chiefs, and the cabinet. And you can see the breakdown of some things that those folks said is going well across the district. And I'll give you all a chance to take a look at this slide, and then I'll move into some pieces that they said are not going well.
Can I ask a question?
What's CTE?
Career
CTE,
tech.
Chris, Kurt had it. Chris, the question was
thank
CTE courses. Define.
Yeah, if any questions come up, Ken, just let me know, or you can answer yourself,
Yep.
whatever's easier.
Career tech education.
What?
Career tech education. So related to like,
Hey, Carl, correct?
yeah, industry certifications, all the things, are more career-focused pathways, not necessarily in lieu of career, but, and certainly in lieu of college, but higher-end, work-ready types of credentials, courses that result in those types of certifications.
So those were, and thank you for those folks who are asking some clarifying questions, keep those coming. I'm gonna shift over to some themes that were brought up that group said were not going well. So this is the next slide coming up. So same breakdown in terms of the different groups of people. We have the board, the chiefs, and the cabinet. And I'll give you all the space to just take a look at what some themes that were brought up amongst those groups.
I have one question.
Same question, any
Yep.
clarifying questions for this slide?
I have one question. Under the board group, who are outside forces?
Ken, did you want me to answer, or did you want to?
Chris, were you able to hear that though? The
It was the third bullet about outside forces, correct?
Mhm. And it's specifically under the board heading, but my recollection was there was that's a theme that I didn't hear just with the board. So I don't know if you want to answer from the board theme standpoint or not.
Yeah, this actually came up during our in-person session with the board last week. And it's simply just business community leaders outside of the school district. And so trying to build those connections with folks outside of the Lee County School District as much as possible, whether it's, like I said, business leaders, community leaders. As we know the board really works outside the district, some of them actually in their professional lives, so trying to bring them in as much as possible is what those outside forces represent.
Wait, now I'm more confused with that answer, because it says what's not going well. So I read it as outside forces are influencing the school district, and we don't want them to, it's not going well. We don't want outside forces influencing the school district. Is that, so what do we mean by not so well when they're saying influence of outside forces?
I was thinking maybe they didn't have
I
enough
mean, am I reading that
partners
wrong?
outside to help, from community partnerships and from that standpoint, but maybe I'm misreading that too.
Yeah, Chris, I'll let you add, but I just, what I recall specifically being dialogued around at the retreat, specifically focused on, are we fully engaged as an entire community? Are we, do we feel like a great relationship with the county commissioners? Do we feel like we have a great working relationship with the local government? Do we feel like we have a great working relationship with the business community, where there's a high level of trust in working together? And I think the consensus was there's a lot of opportunity for improvement in all aspects of the school district in terms of building high levels of trust with all other folks who have essentially an interest in the district performing well, and how are we all working together? That's part of the dialogue that I recall.
Well,
I don't know if that heading,
That's the
That
second.
came up in the workshop on the 11th. I
Yep.
remember you said it perfectly. That's,
no,
you
appreciate it.
captured the whole comments. You guys had a whole discussion on that. In other words, we could do a better job working with the county commissioners and getting their buy-in. We do have quite a few companies that have stepped up to the plate. Bill Dobman, Showerdahl, I guess, is really the leader of the pack. But when you take a look at the size of our community, we have a long way to go to benchmark against other communities that really have the support of business.
So,
It's a theme I recall. I was just trying to recap the comment, the theme that is stated versus what, but I mean, Sam, or Mr. Fisher, rather, you were in the,
Did you want, I don't wanna go out of bounds, but do you want me to clarify my perception of that, or would that?
I would love it because the way that I'm reading this, engagement with the community is the second bullet. And I would hate that the perception of anybody who looks at this to think that business leaders are not part of the community, because then you're sending the message that they're external, but they're actually part of the school district community, those people.
So some of the discussion again, and much of what Chris and Dr. Savage have talked about, that's what it was. One of the points, like for example, I brought up was business interaction with individual schools. So some schools have a lot more buy-in and interaction, relationships with, getting involvement from the business or community organizations to support. So that is one. We did bring up, for example, the county commissioners was one, making sure that we have, better improved working relationships from where we were before with that. It could, community organizations, pretty much at every level, because at least, in my feedback to myself, and I gave in the interview, was there's definitely at least a perception out there that we don't have that interaction, that we haven't had those relationships. A lot of it's really just about relationship building. That's probably a better term that we need to, from at least kind of go from that angle. Does that
An
help at all?
opportunity is
or-
to strengthen those relationships.
Yeah.
It does, but the business relationship with the schools, is that independent of the schools, or are the school district directly involved? Is that just something that happens within the school? Do they establish those relationships? Do they build those relationships? How does that happen?
It can be a bit of both. I don't want to jump in off too much on with Dr. Savage, so, but as I said, some schools do have better relationships with that, and getting support and sponsors, that kind of thing. You can just depending on the school. That's at least my experience, and when I gave that interview, that's what I felt. So.
Yeah.
My only comment is the words outside forces. The connotation of that probably is not what you meant, I don't think.
Yeah, I had a hard time reacting to the word just because the way that I had heard it framed in another way was referring to a completely different group, and so I think it is a challenging, Chris, I think if we can just make sure that's noted from a readout standpoint, and just so we're accurately reflecting what the concerns were and we don't want to misrepresent anything at all.
Absolutely, and I think it's great feedback too, to just clarify that third bullet.
I think
And
it's
I've
almost
been
part of
jotting
the
down some
second
notes too,
bullet.
and we can definitely go back and clarify exactly what this readout theme was, to make sure that it's adjusted as needed, for sure.
It sounds like we're trying to say we've got community, families, people that aren't business affiliated, and then we've got the business affiliations. It sounds like they're trying now to clearly define that.
Yeah, and maybe strengthen those relationships, so that way there's more community engagement.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic
I think a lot of,
thing.
maybe a lot of
Outside
community
forces.
members or businesses may not know that there's an avenue where they can be part, whether that's going through the school district themselves, or being a business partner, or whatever that might look like.
Can I give one more thing, and I don't want to take this over, I know my job here is to listen, just one clarifying thing. It's all about relationships. To give you a concrete example of how that has changed a bit now, for example, right now we've worked well with our local legislative delegation, so up in Tallahassee. One of those things they're helping get appropriations for things, including one is safety. So that would be an example, I think, of this, at least from my perspective, what we're trying to talk about. Strengthen those, whether it's through business, whether it's through community groups, whether it's through the businesses. So those kind of things, specific outcomes, I guess, is probably if that helps.
Yeah, I think so. Any other clarifying questions about that? Thank you that's great feedback that I think they can definitely use on that particular piece. Any other clarifying questions about this before we get into any more?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, Chris, are you good to proceed?
The only other final piece is just to update everyone on our next steps, and some things that we are going to be putting into place in the next few weeks. And so, as we've named earlier, our next retreat with the board, superintendent, and the cabinet team will be held on Tuesday, 5/9. That'll be in person, and our goals for that time will be, as you can see, the 3 goals on the screen. We want to review the feedback that we're gathering across the district, align and continue the conversation on strategic plan priority areas. And then start to distill that down into initiatives and metrics to measure success within priority areas. And in terms of how we are planning to gather community feedback, we are going to be using a survey that will be coming in the next few weeks. And the first round of that survey, we're really going to be focused in on getting feedback around the district's mission, vision, and values, and then diving into some focus areas and initiatives that we are proposing through all of our readout data, through conversations, putting that in the survey to see what the community thinks, and then bringing that back to, like I said, the cabinet, board, and superintendent for that 5-9 meeting. So that survey will be really important. It's going to be coming out in the next few weeks. We're going to be working with Dr. Savage to make sure that it has everything it needs, and that'll be the piece that we bring, like I said, to that 5-9 meeting with the board, superintendent, and cabinet. Any high-level questions about this slide or next steps in general?
I have a question. What does community encompass? Does that encompass teachers or just parents or?
Hey, Chris, could you define community in this broad sense of what kind of groups and segments and how's that happening?
Yeah, we are, let me go back. We're trying to get the broadest picture as possible, so really engaging as many people, and I'm gonna go back to here. So we have our accreditation surveys, like I said, so in terms of community groups, that really encompasses our students, our families, our educators, and the survey is where we really wanna dive into engaging these different groups that you see here. So including the group that's on the call with us right now, or excuse me, in the room, I'm the only one not in the room, but it's this bullet right here. So these folks, these groups in this second bullet is really where the survey is going to be geared. As I said, we have a lot of data already from educators, families, and students.
So the only other question I have, Ken, is the survey, I'm guessing, is going to be made available in the same languages you make other information available?
So the surveys, I can answer this one, I think, Chris. The accreditation, so the top, if you want to go stay on that slide that you're on, Chris,
yep.
just to go back to it. So the largest reach, which is the most people that we're capturing, is through the accreditation. This is a company called Cognia. They do, I believe, add other languages in which they survey that piece to get the student, the educator, and folks, but I think it's 3 languages that they offer it in, so not all languages, but 3, I believe. There's a separate team, so I'm not affiliated with the accreditation, but I'm able to use the data because it's timely, because it literally happened the month of March, so it's very recent. Just to reiterate real quick, just because I think it's important to read, I believe you did say it, Chris, but I want to say it one time. We're not going to be rewriting the strategic plan. This is simply going to be a refresh. So the refresh is really trying to take post-pandemic, post-hurricane, what are some of these, and obviously new governance, we have a new superintendent, we have new board members. It's really kind of looking at our existing strategic plan that is designed to be long-reaching and kind of do a quick reality check. Where are we right now based on these very ambitious goals we set? We've had a few hurdles that we've had to overcome. Are they still as relevant as they were then? Are there new challenges that weren't there then? And maybe even the framing of the plan itself. Are there some things that maybe have become outmoded and need to be re-examined? So I just want to, that's an important level set, that it's not, if Dr. Bridger is very adamant we're not rewriting the plan, because some of the aspects of the plan he really loved about Lee County. But it is important to check back in on, and this is one method. So the first method, that accreditation data you see there, the notion there is to use the thousands and thousands of responses that vary from the quality of instruction that teachers perceive as occurring, that students are perceiving as occurring, to the climate of how do they feel, is it safe? There's a significant number of questions. In fact, there's all, and the board actually got a chance to react to some of that data on that particular piece. So that is designed to be the farthest, broadest reach, and that is defined by our teachers, our educators in the buildings, both elementary, middle, and high, and special centers as well, and then the students and their families. And so this, while you see it broadly recommended, this covers the entire district, every single school. is encompassed in that, and it's, again, very high response rate, so you're not just asking a handful of people, you're asking thousands upon thousands of research validated questions that are asked, and the other benefit is you have then a frame of reference analyzing that data compared to every other institution that gets asked that type of data. And so those are another way why that's one strong data point. The more specific questions that get our survey, the form of a survey that is very specific to what we're unpacking in terms of themes, that's where these next groups, these different board advisories, so for example, DAC, SAC groups, which are affiliated with the DAC, EDAC, which is one of our board advisories for equity diversity, and then RCSI, which again is entirely focused on the strategic plan. It's a natural marriage there. What the idea in this particular area is these groups get more specific targeted survey that is very specific, not just what is in the accreditation, but really these themes that you've been hearing about today. And Chris, please correct me if I'm speaking incorrectly on any of that. So I just want to clarify that we're not going to send a duplicate survey that's going to ask these same people additional information. This is going to be very specific to reacting to the work that is happening with the board. Chris, do you want to elaborate on that before I just make sure I'm not fully answering that question? Is there anything I left out?
No, I think that's perfect clarification, and thank you for naming that. And yeah, we're taking a lot of material that came from that first board retreat. That's gonna take part in when we design this survey, because we do have some priorities that came up, and then we wanna get feedback from, like Ken said, from all of these groups, before we go into that second board retreat, which will be May 9th. But we wanna get that survey data, so we can hear from multiple groups before that.
So we're not surveying the community about the mission, vision, and values, just those groups that you see up there, correct?
Is that accurate, Chris? Yes. Yeah, the community only is answering feedback that is through like the accreditation and such.
From the
of those.
previously done survey.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't make a comment, like I said, as a kid on powder dry, but I've really put my gut into this. I watched the videos, as you all know, which were a little challenging to figure out how to get through the technology and some of the problems that you had. But I think it's very, very important. I like what you had to say about the definition of refresh. I think it gives confidence in the group that we're doing the right thing. Because the last thing we want to do as a strategic planning group is start from fresh, because we have a new superintendent. Is this going to be a flavor of the month type of thing? What happens if we get another new superintendent? I think we have to be consistent with this Envision 2030 plan. And I'm glad to hear that we're just taking a look at the vision, mission, and values, and those things that support that, and tweak them to whatever level we can to enhance being a world-class school system. I think large corporate America does the same thing. We don't come in and we get a new CEO and have flavor of the month. We stay consistent with past practices. We get on a road in a direction, and we tweak it along the way, but our mission is what it is. And I think that's important. For example, I hate to bring up UPS, I'll get some faces here, but for example, UPS going back to 1907, okay, best service, lowest rates. Now what happened as we got into the 90s and 2000s, we had to tweak that. We could still do best service. We always want to have best service, but we can't say lowest rates because we have to be competitive now. So we had to tweak that a little bit, competitive rates. But the mission is still the same. I don't care if you talk to a driver that's been retired for 50 years or a driver tomorrow. It's best service, that's our culture. And our culture should be world-class, a world-class school system. I think that stays consistent. That's it, I'm done.
Chair, did you want to entertain any more questions?
Does anybody have any other questions? Okay, I think we're ready to keep going.
Chris, I think we are ready.
Yeah, that was my final update, were the next steps. And so if there are no other questions, or Dr. Savage, if you wanted me to update anywhere else, that was all I had for this presentation.
So if I could just highlight actually something that Bill had mentioned, when he specifically talked about the mission, vision, values, and the next big piece of these strategic plan priorities areas, and even looking at our current strategic plan, what would qualify as a priority and whatnot. There's just a lot of work to be done there. And that's really the lion's share of that next that next retreat that is a work session for the board again. And it's big, so this is a really big opportunity. So whatever feedback this group is able to provide as they are starting to formulate towards this end will be very helpful, just because you're naturally representative of a lot of diverse viewpoints. So I just want to echo to the CSI committee that this is the work of the CSI committee. This is your work. The strategic plan is your work. And rarely do we get the opportunity to be a part of a refresh. So please, as you get those opportunities, and especially the open-ended aspects of it and those qualitative, I would just say, when you get that information, it'll be after this meeting will have occurred, but your voice will still carry forward on it. And so, you all have, we're gonna, and Chris, you haven't been a part of a lot of the other pieces, but they've had 2 other presentations that we've had. One of them, the most recent one, in fact, based on questions that came out of this group, they're collecting new data. They're looking at data on our students in ways that can be extremely helpful to understanding how students are performing in our district related to services. And I got to see that data firsthand. It was exciting, but it just goes to show the power of a committee such as this, asking difficult questions, trying to inform yourselves, speaking from your different vantage points. It was a synthesis of this group that led to a powerful improvement. So I wanted to share that as an example. Now I ask you to really take a look at what the priorities and things are coming, because it's all based on feedback, but echo, if there's blind spots, if there's things that your vantage point doesn't yield, this is the nature of the work. So no matter what recommendations we make as a group today, as a committee, just know that this is a powerful opportunity. So I just wanted to echo and thank you for doing it. And Chris, thank you for zooming in today to be able to kind of update on where they're at within this process and kind of giving them orientation of what they're going to be getting relative to the survey.
Yep.
Are there any other
Yeah.
questions before we close them out? Because I want to make sure, because while we have elements on there, if there's anything else you need or want to ask, there's really no bad question to ask. If there's anything you can think of.
Anybody have any questions for Chris? Okay, I think we're all set.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great evening.
Okay, so we have reached the stage, and even early in our agenda, we are going to hear a board member update from Mr. Fisher.
Hope everyone's doing well. The retreat, first of all, thank you, Dr. Savage, as well as, Chris and Dr. DeLeon. It was a really good retreat from the aspect that I think we really just opened up with certain things and really got out there with some of our positives and some of the deficiencies. I'll tell you, even just from the HR presentation here and EL last time, I listened to all of your comments, and some of those things we were able to bring up and talk about that. That was a really good thing, a really cool thing. I really enjoyed that part of it. So, and we really did, some of that you'll see was some of the focus of that. So I appreciate what everyone does here, and as I said, really just listen to what you had to say. A couple things I'm looking through. One of the statistics that we had that really hit me during that retreat was there was survey data from elementary, middle school, and high school, and one of the questions was that really hit me. The question was lessons that made me want to learn new things. So lessons that made me want to learn new things, and there was a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 absolutely, 1 not at all. Our elementary students were at, I believe when I calculated it, between 4 and 5, so I consider that they want to, 74%. Middle school and high school were combined, 41%. Granted, I have a teenager, I understand that, and I try to think back to my days in middle school and high school, but still, that was a number that really kept coming. I mean, that, the gap of over 33% or something. So that really hit me, and that was something we really went into. So that was one thing, that I'd like, as we look forward to strategic plan, excuse me, it's been a day already, that, that's something under achievement. I think that's something we really want to have a focus on. So at least that was something that was really continued when we kept coming back to the issue. That was one of them. Again, culture kept coming up. That was a big thing, especially, and we talked about here in HR, teacher and staff retention is a huge thing. More so even so than recruitment, really making sure and working that culture, seeing what works and what doesn't work, taking those outside ideas. There was a couple comments in there, then, and one of these I thought was interesting, because they took surveys of us and, the board members and chiefs. I believe this was from a chief, so, and they said, well, this quote was interesting and something that stood out. Believes, operations have to be more efficient, says that we believe we have systems, but find evidence that we don't. I thought that was a very interesting one, so, and that was a focus of, Dr. Bernier actually had brought up during that retreat. I thought that was interesting, so that we believe we have these things, but in fact, some of these people believe we don't, and that was I like that being brought up. That was very, as I said, I think it was really good, and I believe Dr. Savage would agree with this, that we really brought out some things, as I said, we really just tried to put stuff out there. We didn't hold back on anything, and I think it was very productive from that aspect, so. Talked about before community, each of us kind of brought our own perspective in that, and I kind of had elaborated on it before when you talked about the outside forces, which again, I don't think that was the best description of it, but really, one of the things we want to improve upon and through, with strategic plan is how do we interact, as I said, community is a big thing for me, how do we deal, with, our parents and our community stakeholders, but then again, businesses I talked about, community groups, community organizations, our local governments, that was a focus of things in there as well, so, trying to see, it came up, safety, obviously that was top of all of us, as part of the strategic plan refresh, so, student success at graduation, and what does that mean? That was a big thing that came up as well, which could be, entering the workforce, having those skills, college, tech college, military, what are our outcomes for that? And the last thing I think out of that, I'm just trying to think about some of the things to give you an overview as well, was discipline as part of culture came up. I thought that was interesting. We had a big discussion on that, and discipline, how it affects in the classroom. That's something I'll tell you just from visiting schools, listening to my constituents, even on the campaign trail, something, we talked about and how we can help our teachers out with that and also be consistent across the board. I'm sure it's something, I think we'd actually might have talked about that at the prior meeting a little bit, so, but how much it is with teachers right now, how tough and make sure that they're being helped with that, have our message, again, of consistency. That was a big thing, is consistency in the district and listening, so. Those are some of the things that I think came up, at least from my perspective, that I thought were very interesting and things that we really need to work on, and hopefully, as this refresh continues, that we can talk about. So I hope that helps somewhat. So I don't know if anyone had any questions for me on that or not, or anything you'd like me to bring up. I know we have later on, we talk about it.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Fisher? Everyone's saving it up for the discussion, right? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Fisher. So we are at the point in our agenda where we, as a committee, need to review the 2 priority topics that we covered this year that were identified as priorities in our first meeting. And the first one is related to the strategic objective workforce success and our human resource presentation. And we've talked about the fact that workforce success, and Mr. Fisher has just reiterated for us, that's not something that is going to be forgotten in the refresh of the strategic plan. So certainly something that this committee should discuss. So I will open it up to anybody who wants to speak to this topic in terms of possible board recommendations or other suggestions you may have with regard to workforce success and the presentation we had from HR. Christy?
Oh,
Did you
go
have
down the
anything?
road? I have lots of things. Am I
Okay,
starting?
related to this, sure, we're gonna get started,
Yeah.
and I'll start with you.
Thank you. So, it's interesting listening to you, Mr. Fisher, about, your sort of take on things, because something that jumped out at me specifically was in the survey that we received, I think it was an elementary school. A lot of what you just echoed was very clearly in this survey. Safety, retention, discipline is a part of culture, definitely a lot of those things. So a couple of takeaways for me. The first one was really in our presentation with Dr. Doge, is that the right
Mr.
name?
Doge,
Thank you. Was how the climate survey and that re-engagement survey really weren't operationalized as far as consistent across the class, across school districts, all of each classroom. We weren't even able to see, if I'm not mistaken, we weren't even able to see what that re-engagement survey looks like because there was no consistency. If we're talking about a refresh and operationalize and being systematic, you have to put those processes in place. That was really one standout for me during the presentation, and not being able to sort of see any of that data. So that'd be my first. My second takeaway specifically from this, and you hit on this, of not having the data and the systems and the processes in place, was one key word that I took out of here was the question on what they could take off the plate. And one of those was really automating data. We talk about time spent in the classrooms, and we want them to really focus on the teaching and being able to be disciplined, to be present, to be with the parents and all of that. How much time are they really spending on that data entry and those pieces? So those were two big things that kind of jumped out at me. So.
Yes. Do you have any specific recommendations you have, or would you want to wait until after everybody has a chance?
I don't have specific recommendations, short of really finding a way to operationalize those surveys, or those two surveys would be my key recommendation.
I'm trying to make notes while I'm also talking.
I know I talk fast, I'll slow down.
Lisa, did you have anything that you?
No, I'm just kind of digesting a lot of the information, and I think that, Mr. Fisher said, and kind of aligning with what we just listened to in the survey, they almost align very well with the two topics that have been selected, so that workforce success and trying to figure out a way that we can better assist in creating, I guess, a culture and a way that we can help with retention. I know that that's huge right now for the district. Is okay, so how can we create, or how can we put forth a recommendation that can really help from that standpoint? So there's some things that are completely beyond our control from a staffing standpoint, but like what type of recommendation can we provide as a team to help with that workforce success that also aligns with our commitment as a CSI group to help them, I guess maybe almost think out of the box as it relates to like that culture and that retention. I mean, is it bringing community partners to the table? Like, what does that look like? Is it, thinking outside of the box? I know that there's, currently staffing issues, which has kind of not helped with the, with the retention standpoint of a culture, because obviously when you're not staffed appropriately, that creates tension and that filters down to the students, right? So is there something that we can do as a committee to make some recommendations around that piece?
Okay.
I don't know if that's out of our room or not. And then the other point that he mentioned was, which was crazy, that 41% of the middle school and high school students who felt like the lessons that they were obtaining, not really aligned, that they weren't learning new things. And does that relate to the question that was the career path piece, right? Obtaining a better lens on what does a career path look like for these students, because I almost think like they're correlated to each other, and I know like growing up we had like home ec and all these other little things that we would do, and a lot of conversations around, okay, what are you gonna do when you grow up? And I know that conversation is there, but I know that those career paths look differently now than they did even when we went to school. So, how do we, and again, lessons are sometimes out of the control of the school district sometimes, right? So like, how could we make a recommendation to help with that piece, which aligns with the increased student achievement piece of what we have forward? So I don't have a specific recommendation at this point, but I know that those were a couple topics that I pulled from today's conversation that I think, we can come up with something.
Thank you. Tamara?
Oh, you're just going around?
I'm just gonna go around, yeah. That way everybody gets a turn.
For me, the low-hanging fruit, that's the biggest bang for our buck, is, as Christy said, those climate surveys. And not just on top of making sure that we're doing it consistently across the board, operationalizing it so there's a structure in place to escalate. So make it more visible, make sure that if we get subpar results that we mitigate, and then there's a responsibility for somebody to actually do the mitigation piece of it. accountability around those things. I think for retention purposes, we already have the survey in place, we already are doing it, so just making it a priority is gonna make a huge difference. It will help with culture, it will help with all of these other things if we can retain our teachers and if we can, have somebody that's committed and engaged.
Thank you. Did you have anything?
Well, just to
Okay.
continue with the surveying part, because that notice kept showing up on my launch pad, and I'm not sure how that works to, maybe find a way to encourage as many people as possible to do those surveys, because I'm like, I already did that survey. But yeah, the surveying is, the questions were right on point. But as far as the workforce success, the school board, the school board committee and all of the committees on the school board, when they have those community meetings, I think that, I don't know how many people, if you have a good number of people that show up for those meetings, but I think that would be a good start, to reach out to community leaders and different various people to come in and maybe get some input from them about what might need to happen in the school district to increase the retention for the employees. But I'm just thinking back, as my experience as a teacher and a SAC, a school advisory chairperson and what have you, that I think that you need to get more people in the community involved. You don't want the same people all the time, some different people.
I'll set it on.
That's it.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, my one comment kind of flows in with the survey. I was shocked when I read the survey about the behavior in the classroom and talk about cause and effect. I mean, my daughter was from Arizona and she's an administrator, and I showed her the survey when I took her to the airport. We were talking about it, she goes, it's the exact same thing in our school district. It's just the paradigm change in our society where parents, don't come in and help with discipline and any type of values and morals with their student or with their children. But that's something that we have to address because it's creating turnover in the school district. I mean, the teachers are pretty frustrated with this. They don't feel they're getting, it's a survey, it came right out, they don't feel they get support from management. And the students are saying that the classroom environment's not conducive to learning because it's too disruptive. So that's a big piece that we really have to take a look at.
Does that align with, there being more students now per educator, per teacher? I know, for example, there are some schools that, you have a teacher that's supposed to be like a coach or leader coach, and I know they've been taking on classrooms, even though that's not technically their role, but they're currently short-staffed, so they're having to take on a classroom and sometimes splitting it between two different teachers in order to, so, obviously, when you have a teacher there full-time, students tend to have that clear direction, but when you're not having that staffing in that particular scenario, I mean, that sometimes affects behaviors as well.
Definitely goes back to retention,
Yes.
retention
Yes.
issue for sure.
Absolutely.
And
I-
class, and the class success rate, the student success rates. I have a first grader and a middle schooler, and my first grader will tell you everything that goes on. Which kid gets kicked out of class is back 10 minutes later, You hear every bit of it. Well,
Accountability.
that time with that one student pulled out of the classroom, you're impacting how many teachers and how many classrooms. And then it cycles right back in.
Do we
So we're
have-
gonna,
Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure we get all the
Yeah,
way
yes,
around.
yes.
I have a few things. First, I was wondering, Ken, is there anybody that codes and themes that data from the climate surveys? This looks like raw data, and I know, there's only so many staff at the district level. We've had this conversation before, but I'm just curious about that.
Let me make sure I know which one. You're referring to the climate, I gave the committee
like
one
the
example of a
example, yeah.
specific school
Yeah.
climate data. No, there's no, and this goes back to the comment, the operationalizing. That individual school piece is just that one piece. So how they react to that individual school, but yeah, thematically, what does it look like across the whole district? Other than someone the principal supervisor maybe seeing common theme, there isn't any presently. But I think
Yeah.
that's, again, opportunity for feedback.
Absolutely, because I think when you look at that raw qualitative data, you're looking at it through your own perspective and your own lens. So you're gonna find things that are important to you. But if you had it, analyzed and coded and themed statistically, so that it was reliable and valid, the data may look a little bit different, and everybody would have a shared understanding of what the specific themes were by school. So that is one recommendation I have. The other recommendation I have is that, and I mentioned this during Mr. Dotage's presentation, I think that if retention is one of the top issues in terms of workforce success, in terms of economically as well as student achievement, because if, like you said, Lucinda, if there's no teacher in the classroom or we're using other personnel, that creates a problem. But looking at the idea of having a third-party organization do things like exit interviews, where maybe we would get a better response rate and a more accurate response rate for those folks who feel uncomfortable sharing why they might be leaving the district. And I know Mr. Dotage mentioned that you're looking at that for substitutes, so it might be a good idea to also look at having an external agency do those exit interviews. And then, I have one other thing, but I'm gonna keep going because I've been so busy taking everyone. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is, there's a book called Victory in Our Schools. It was written by John Stanford. He was a retired military person who was made the superintendent of Seattle Public Schools in 1995. And the whole book is about creating a different culture in the school district where you are looking at your business partners as school partners. And that's a culture shift. And so that came up in tonight's presentation about the refresh. And I think it's definitely a book. It's an older book, but the concepts I think relate really well to what we heard tonight in terms of the refresh and how we use our business partners and other community organizations to support the schools and creating that culture school by school and also district-wide. And those are my 3 things. So, Brianne, do you have something?
I have 2. The first one is my research background is turnaround leadership. Going into schools, what is it about turnaround principles that makes them so different than other traditional principles? And what really, right now in my school, I'm developing all the assistant principals. And what I have found is it's so important to understand the context. That's why we really can't scale improvement, is because we really have to get to know our school. So when I go into a school or when I work with aspiring leaders or teacher leaders, it's really getting to know what's going on, like where is the discipline happening, where, like the incident type, what are the consequences, what are we doing to be proactive, So I think that that's really important, like principals, especially with some movement that's going on, they have to understand their school. And that might even involve having other people come in and help them find the context of their school. Once we understand the context, then we can go to developing the plan, implementation of the plan, and then finally progress monitoring that plan. The implementation piece is so important. It's getting people mobilized, right? And not only that, what I have found to be very successful is I started teacher leadership. And so we were very broad at first, learning about different countries. And then we talked about, well, how does this relate to my school, our current system of 4 schools? And who better than the people in the school? And they wanted that growth opportunity. So what happened was, it was a beautiful thing. We had different committees form organically. One issue was a sub-issue, substitute teachers, they're not trained. What are we gonna do? So what did we do? We mobilized the team. This is the sub, we're gonna train subs. Brought them in, we gave them a grand tour. Where do you put your stuff? Where's your desk? Walk them around the building. They got the opportunity to go into some different classrooms, my rock star teachers. They got to communicate and they feel like this is their school, So it's like we are solving problems right at the school level, but I think it's so important for us to understand our school and our kids. The second thing was Future Makers. I'm part of Future Makers, and the goal of the Future Makers Collaboratory is really to get 55% people credentialed in Southwest Florida. I'm the only person from the school system in my group, for that particular committee. And what a great way to make connections, because you have the hospital, you have so many different, FGCU, they're talking about, my 7th graders can go on a field trip. what better, let's go on a field trip and let's come back, let's go see, after you see you in 7th grade. So you're making that bridge between the middle school and the college, like what you do here matters for there. So that was really, I think those 2 pieces I just wanted to share.
Thank you. Megan?
And then just, I know we've talked about it a lot, that comment of the outside partners, but that is bringing me caution that we don't have those open communications between business partners. I work with Lee Health, and I know that Golisano has a huge behavioral health program. And just from some of the numbers that I've seen, we've seen an increase, like a 12,000% increase in the number of visits in pediatric behavioral health visits just in the last 3 years, so from 2019 to 2022. So as we're talking about behavioral issues in the classroom, I think that's evident based on the healthcare side of things. So I think Golisano was very open. I'm not sure exactly what our partnership is between Golisano and the school system, but I know they're very open to those partnerships and looking to connect within Lee County. And then the second component that is piquing my interest as we're listening and bringing recommendations is, I know that Lee County has a interest in the Sterling and Baldrige framework. Through Lee Health, I'm a Sterling examiner, and we are submitting our Sterling application. And just hearing more of the the systematic pieces and things like that, I think it could be beneficial to take a look at that as an operating model. Just look at some of those questions again and see what opportunities there are to bring more systemness to Lee County.
Thank you.
Those are my 2 pieces.
Mike? Last but not least.
Well, I'll throw out 2 and I'll try to be more tactical and specific ideas. One would be maybe counterintuitive, but don't drop accreditation requirements. Because to me, that's cutting off your nose to spite your face. So we don't have teachers, so let's just make it easier for any Tom, Dick, or Harry to be a teacher, to me is the wrong direction. So that would be my one idea. Don't be tempted by taking the cop-out easy way out and reducing accreditation requirements for teachers. The second one, trying to be also addressing retention, is looking at, well, what makes us different from other places that maybe it's not as bad? And one thing I was looking at is, well, you see it in the newspaper articles all the time, how expensive it is to rent in Lee County. So tactically, we've been talking about business partners. Is there any way we can try to reach out to all of these corporations that own all of these rental buildings and talk to legislators and try to make them whole? Is there any systemic-wide across Lee County where you can put a rent relief program in place for teachers saying, hey, if you're a teacher in Lee County and you're renting in Lee County, you get X amount of discount on your rent, to get it at least more in line with the national average of salary to rent, because we're out of whack with the national average. So that would be a rationale. We're not handing out free lunches, we're just trying to get teachers back on par with where they actually should be nationally in the United States, what the proportion of their income versus the proportion of their rent is. And then if rent ever gets into range where it should be, well, then you can drop that program. It's not needed anymore. But, so that's my 2 ideas.
Thank you. So I think before we move on to our second topic this year, which was increased student achievement with the emphasis on ELL, maybe we should have a conversation about any recommendations based on what everybody has shared that they would like to put forth to the board. I heard several people mention some things. Does anybody want to make a motion about a recommendation?
I would like to make.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Yes, as I asked in the last meeting with the ESOL department about from a teacher's perspective, the number of students in the classroom and the teacher and them not receiving the accommodations that they're expected, because teachers have to document those accommodations in their lesson plans. So I'm only one person, and that's, ELL accommodations, the teacher-student ratio.
So did you want to wait until we had a chance to discuss the ELL topic, or
Yeah.
is this motion related to?
Yeah, we can wait until we talk
Okay.
about the ELL.
Yeah, you're welcome to make that motion for that topic. Anybody have a specific motion they would like to make related to workforce success in our HR presentation?
You're saying different, or like, so if you added up all the ideas everybody had, we've got like 8 or 9, is that too many?
Well, they weren't all necessarily formal recommendations. So what I'm looking for is a motion for a specific recommendation. I'll start, maybe that will help.
I know you have one.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion that we recommend to the board that they explore using external agencies to conduct exit interviews. And so if anybody would like to second that motion, then we can have discussion.
I'll second it.
Okay, so now I'll open it for discussion.
I guess my only question is specific to exit interviews, or are you considering stay interviews too? I know those are both beneficial.
I think any type of interviews where we are collecting data related to why people are leaving the district,
Mhm.
that they are currently giving to district employees.
Okay.
Is there an expansion for not just staff, but to kids that are leaving? I know that we do some sort of that already.
Well, I think because this motion is related to teacher retention,
Sure.
I'd like to keep it focused on that.
I think that's a wonderful idea, because we've acknowledged that one of the biggest shortfalls we have is if retention's a problem, if you don't know why people are leaving, you got a problem, you don't even know how to go about
Yeah.
fixing.
Any other discussion? Okay, so I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the motion for the recommendation for the board to explore using a third-party agency for exit interviews and other data for instructional staff leaving the district, say aye or raise your hand so Misty can record the vote.
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Abstain. Okay, so that would be the first one. I have a second motion, so y'all are welcome to make your motions, but here I am.
Good way to get started, sometimes this takes.
Somebody has to start. So my second motion might be to recommend to the board that they explore coding and theming climate survey data for the benefit of developing a shared understanding of what that data is.
I said, yeah.
Okay, so we have several people second. I think I heard Yolanda first. Now I'll open it for discussion.
Do we have any, do we know the difference in schools that are like Leader in Me schools versus like camp, like what like the morale is in those kind of schools versus one that doesn't have like a Leader in Me type of program?
I think that is one of the advantages actually to coding and theming the
Right.
data, is being able to drill down by school to what are the issues at each school, and then you could compare the various programs and services that are offered in each school once you have the data.
When they include, like when they do the survey, maybe putting, are you a Cambridge school? Are you an IB school? Are you a Leader in Me school? Like trying to find out like, maybe what programs that school, so we can differentiate, okay, there's success there. Then is it attributable to that program or maybe, something else?
Or identify the most help needed.
Mhm. Yeah. Any other discussion?
Is there a data and analytics type department within the Lee County School District, or?
I think we're looking at him.
I think fair honest to the record straight, we have an accountability department,
I
but they
nominate Dr. Stone.
manage all of the, like, the testing requirements in terms of that piece, and they have it's a very small group. But obviously, and then I'm kind of an independent, I work for the superintendent, so it's a little different, but I love that side of it as well,
Yeah.
so.
I think you're gonna need a team.
It's- it's-
One of the ideas that I have had in the past, and I cannot speak for my colleagues because I haven't approached them with this, although we've had conversations about it in the College of Education, is using our research and assessment faculty to actually conduct some of this work. Because this to me is work that, as long as we have school names and individual names redacted, we're just looking at data. And so in that case, I think that some of my colleagues would be very happy to code and theme this data. lots of opportunity there for partnerships, actually. Okay, any other discussion?
Yes,
Oh,
I
yeah.
have a question. Could we add, or would this be a separate motion, to make sure that once the data has been codified and presented, that we mitigate any gaps, and that there's mandatory to mitigate those gaps in performance where we find it? Because I think that's the missing piece.
I think that's a separate motion,
Okay.
and Tamara, you're welcome to make that motion separately. Let's finish this one.
Okay.
Yeah, because that gets into kind of policy issues and those sorts of things. So this is just a matter of making the data more accessible for people, this motion. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, so I'll call for the vote. All in favor of the board exploring coding and theming data from school climate surveys to develop a shared understanding, say aye or raise your hand so Misty can record the vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Abstain? Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have a motion related to workforce success and the HR strategic objective?
Maybe we could do a motion together.
Sure.
I'll make the motion to operationalize the climate and the re-engagement surveys. Specific to making sure that it's done consistently across the schools, that the same questions are asked, that it is represented using the code, the codes and the generic back to the back to the schools, back to the educators, so that you can see, and there's some accountability and responsibility, that's allowing the administrators to really be able to see what's happening across the different schools. If you, back to my original point, we didn't have any of that re-engagement survey available, but it's happening at the schools. It's happening at some of the schools, maybe all of the schools, just really putting that to form and function so that it can be done consistently across the schools.
Okay, I'm gonna try and restate your motion. Thank you.
That's probably
I
not
see
all
Misty
of
over
it.
there out of one eye, like.
I'm drawing little circles right now, because, I'm getting lost every 2 seconds.
So,
I'll
Christy, you
teach
can,
myself to slow
I'll try
down.
and clarify, and if I misrepresent what you said, you can correct me. So I think your motion is to operationalize the climate surveys by sharing the data with the stakeholders after it's been coded in the.
I would say specifically to operationalize the climate surveys, how the data is collected, so process, right, so the process.
Operationalize the process
Yeah.
of conducting climate surveys, which also
Data
includes.
collection, the follow-up and distribution, and
Response.
mitigating the issues.
Misty, I think operationalize the climate survey process
Got it.
would be the
And
motion.
the response. And the response.
The climate survey process, which includes the response.
Include
Yeah.
data collection, distribution, outcomes.
Is there a second for Christie's motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, so Tamara seconded it. Is there any discussion on the motion? I hear crickets, so let's call for the vote.
You had mentioned the word mediate. I think that's a pretty powerful word. Can we fit that in there or not? Into that motion, I'll tell you why. I don't wanna go back on conduct, but we spent a lot of time last few years talking about conduct, if you remember. 2020, 2021, we went through this whole manual that was built, and we went through the whole process and how each and every parent has to sign off on this thing. And we or the district spent a ton of money on this thing, and here we are still talking about it, and I don't think we moved the needle. And that's why I thought when you brought that up, I think, hey, we gotta take some action on some of the results of some of these things. And until we really take action on what this thing's all, we never had this, I'm 72 years old, so naturally we didn't have it 100 years ago. But I mean, think about going back years ago, even when my kids were in school, we never had a manual. My daughters are 40 and 42, we never had a manual. This thing goes, there's a lot of time in this thing. This goes through every possible behavior you could violate and the consequences of that. And we still aren't moving the needle, so if we could move that word in there somehow in that motion, I'd be excited to do that.
I think, this is my thought. If you add the word mitigate in the sense that you expect the school to take action, that's a really broad statement, because we don't know yet what the results of any climate survey is, and then that would have to be investigated, because they're not sharing specific.
Oh, but we do know the
insights.
result, it's already here. Read this thing, it's right here, we do know the result.
But how would you mitigate that?
I
But
don't
that's
know.
the process we need to set up.
Yes.
It's gotta be a process of who looks at it, who oversees it, who goes about making the operational changes or the whatever changes. And then coming back and making sure the changes have been implemented, holding people accountable, like you said, having people learn their environment, their culture, understanding where they're failing at some point and contributing to the negative culture or the bad outcomes or what have you. That's what I'm looking for when I'm, supporting this motion. It's that whole process.
It's
I would
accountability.
actually.
And the word kept coming up time and time again in your workshop, accountability.
Yep.
That word kept coming up more and more, it's all about accountability. And somehow we gotta drive the word accountability into the process and make this stuff happen. Or it's just words, or we're just meeting here and we're putting words on a piece of paper.
So
So
do we
what-
feel that surveys in the past, we've not developed action plans to address the red flags that came out of those surveys? And
I don't know if we know that.
I think HR said it's not consistent, it just depends on the school and whoever's working with that particular facility. So that's why, operationalizing, standardizing, those are the words that structure, standardization, visibility, what else did I put down? Accountability, all of those words I have right here.
So what has to happen now, I believe, is Christy, you would either withdraw your motion, or you would withdraw it and restate it, including what Bill suggested, or we would vote on your motion as is if you're not willing to amend or withdraw, and then somebody could make a third motion that gets seconded, because we have a second, so we now need to, it's up to Christy to decide if she's gonna withdraw her motion, and restate it amended, or if we're just gonna vote on this motion, and then we could make a third motion based on what Bill has shared.
So I would say for me, I feel like the way that it is includes the initial data collection through the outcomes, if it's written properly, because, part of the presentation today included climate and culture. They needed a culture of trust. This survey includes that we're not listening to them. If you create the process in a way that part of the outcome piece is included, I would think that would be a part of that.
Okay.
I'm comfortable letting it stand for a vote.
Can we
Okay.
hear the motion again as it was stated?
Misty, could you read it
Motion to
out?
operationalize the process climate survey and includes response. If I missed something, sorry.
by includes response, that implies, okay, I've got all this great data, I'm gonna take
You have to
action.
do something.
Yeah, I
Right?
think that
To me,
covers
that's the word action. I mean, are we requiring that you actually act on the information you get from it? You just don't say, oh, that's interesting, let's do something else.
So Christy has reaffirmed her motion, we have a second on the floor. If there's no more discussion, then I'm gonna call for the vote. Okay, all in favor of Christy's motion, say aye or raise your hand so Misty can record
Aye.
it. Aye. Anybody opposed? Abstain? Okay. Does anybody else have a motion they would like to make about HR and workforce? I have to say, I've been on this committee for a long time. This is the first time we've ever had 3 motions on one topic, so that's exciting, because that means we were all paying attention and felt,
That's because the first time we saw the survey.
So our next topic, we looked at increasing student achievement with a specific emphasis on the impact of English language learners. And that is under student achievement in the strategic plan. So I think I speak for everybody for saying that was a very informative presentation. And I think all of us learned something, certainly. Ken, before we talk about, share our thoughts, could you just share with the committee, you had mentioned that the ESOL department had started collecting different types of data.
Yes.
So could you just share with the committee?
Yes, one of the things they've done, and again, it was this committee that did it, was asking the questions. They started trying to figure out how they could capture the exit rates. This was powerful because it was, for the first time ever, we were seeing visualizations based on some of the questions. Like Mike had said, well, wouldn't theoretically like a kindergartner, first grade, or second grade, wouldn't they be in it for less time, like 2 years? And in fact, he was right on the money. It was about 2.5 years was the average rate for that primary. However, when it went a little bit higher, that number grew, as we would expect. But the challenge the reason why I didn't send that data out is because I'm always concerned about data validity as well. So I don't want to ever share data with you that I know may be flawed in some way. So part of the problem when you're pioneering this data work, and again, to our knowledge, it isn't happening in the state either. So the state has the fields that we track, but in terms of producing summary reporting that could be useful in this regard, it's something that we really think the state could benefit from as well. But the problem that's missing in the data was when we were looking at this exit data, it appeared that a significant amount of US students who are born in the US, but were starting as ELLs, were exiting. There was a pretty even distribution there. The problem was, what that actually told us when we dug a little bit deeper, was that a lot of the students who were born outside the country have still not exited. So that's a challenge because you don't want to misrepresent an exit rate when there are students right now who are in the process who have not exited. They're just there. They're still receiving services. And so those statistics that they had summarized were excluding those important students. So it's kind of like out in the universe, there's black holes and you can't see them, but you know that they're there based on the mass that's there. Well, it's the same thing. There's this group of students that are there, but you can't really collect the data because they haven't exited the services. And so you're generalizing based on the students who have. So what it did confirm, that Mike had suggested was, yes, students who enter in the early years tend to exit at a much faster rate, which marries what we already would assume would happen. Students who are acquiring the language, kids in kindergarten, first and second, they're also learning language. They're learning words they didn't know yet. Now, some of them they already know verbally, but they're learning written language like everyone else. When you get to past third grade and beyond, that's when you really saw a very different picture. It's students who now, they're looking at text, they don't know any of those words they're looking at, which again confirms to what the group and the committee discussed. So we have some of that data. The problem is I didn't send it forward yet because, again, I would say it's not at a point yet from a validity standpoint where I think it could stand on its own and not be misinterpreted. And that's a shame because I would love to be able to just turn over all those data visualizations to you and us talk about them. But when I saw that critical aspect that was missing, there's one other thing that the committee mentioned related to the EL data that I think bears reminding. One of the biggest ahas of that experience that I believe the committee unpacked was how when a student graduates out of those services, so when they're exited from those ELL services, they move from one category to the other. So, for example, when you're looking at the achievement rate of ELL students, you're talking about students who are currently receiving services. Well, the second that a student actually passes the test, they may be exited from those services. So in a way, this ELL group that's showing this remarkably low achievement in terms of what you're looking at, certainly, there are plenty of students who are in this achieving group that used to be ELL students, that used to be receiving services, but no longer are. And so there's that hidden story. So talk about a moving target. The second I pass a test, I'm no longer part of this calculation. So it'd be like if you had if you have a class of 30 students, 5 of them pass the test, and because they passed the test, I remove them from your class and I put them in someone else's class. Now it looks like you still don't have any students passing the test, but it's because I took those students out of the equation. So in a nutshell, that's what's happening with the ELL category, just based on the way that category. So that was brought up and then the group reacted to that, but that's a powerful piece when you're analyzing data that I don't think is broadly known. So again, just one more kudos to the group and your unpacking of those pieces. So those are two of the major findings, I would say, from it. But yes, there are tons of data visualizations. I just don't feel comfortable sending them out because I know that they would represent a story that isn't potentially very accurate.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and start on this side this time. So Mike, would you like to share any feedback about a recommendation for this particular topic?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, and I'll take it a step further, so I think we want to be out-of-the-box thinkers, right? I would say, from what they described at that presentation, how we measure ELLs, throw it all out the window. The fact that if someone's ELL that means they're not good at English. There's always gonna be an achievement gap, right? I mean, so trying to close the gap between an ELL student and a non-ELL student is an exercise in futility. And we're measuring the wrong thing. I don't care what that gap is, obviously they're gonna be worse. The focus needs to be on exiting the ELL status. That needs to be the focus. The primary priority needs to be, how do I take this person that doesn't know the language, and what's hurting them in schools, they don't know the language, expedite learning the language. And all the metrics should be around exit rates and, they're gonna be shitty students, sorry. I mean, they're gonna be more students when they don't know the language, but the goal then is to get them exited where they are proficient at English, and then they're just part of the regular pack and everybody else. And so it's a revamping of how you're looking at it and the metrics and your KPIs and what you view as important. It should all be focused on learning the language. We switched to a 7-block schedule now, right? So I'm sorry, I try to get very specific and tactical to say, well, how would you fix this? Okay, at any grade, have 3 of those 7 classes is focused on English language, and then they're only taking 4 other classes. So like half of their day, even at whatever grade they're in, is you're gonna learn this language. I mean, that's what's gonna help you more than anything else. If you're here, learn the language, and that needs to be the focus. And any metrics about how successful we are with ELLs should be having reduced exit rates across the board. That should be the KPI we should be driving to. How can we shorten those exit rates? How can we take someone who's struggling in English and make them proficient in English as quickly as possible? Because that's how we would help them more than anything else, is get them proficient in English.
Thanks, Mike. I just, really quick, there's 2 things I just wanted to bring up related to what you just said. I don't disagree with you at all, but it's for me, a little bit narrow view of the picture, because it's not just learning the English language. Students for whom English is not their first language, it's not just the vocabulary, but also the context, like Brigham was saying. For example, I just recently showed my students a video of an English language learner student. The teacher was talking about a math problem, and she was talking about city blocks. In his mind, the word blocks meant the square things you play with. So he could not, in context, understand what she was saying, even though he knew the word block. So I think there's some barriers there beyond just knowing vocabulary that are important to address when we talk about addressing ELL students, besides just language, right? There has to be a context. So that learning process is a little bit longer than just, if you know English, you will be more successful. I'm not saying students will not be more successful, but the rate of increase maybe is not going to be as rapid as.
So whatever that correct exit criteria should be, which it includes conversational context or what have you, focus your energy on what is that right exit criteria.
Yeah, what does achievement look like
And what,
for that ELL student?
and all the
So
energy on getting there. And maybe 2 years, 3 years is good, but we don't know what good is, because.
Yeah. And then, sorry, Megan,
No,
I'm gonna get
no,
to you in a
it's
second.
okay.
And then the next comment really is, I think it's important for us as a committee to recognize state requirements in terms of achievement gaps and ELL students meeting proficiency and all of that, because I think there's a lot of cases for me personally where I'd like to throw the system out and start over, but we're operating under legislative issues that we need to be aware of. So I think it would be important for this committee to be aware of what are those legislative issues that we have to report. And I think that might be another presentation we have next year. Megan?
Yeah, I want to hear that everyone else is, I'm struggling with the data gap from the district perspective. I have a very big data brain, so I would like to make the recommendation to strengthen the district's data capacity.
Okay.
So, not necessarily related to ELL, but I think it could be inclusive of that.
Well, just so you know that, the school district shares that information, and then some of that data is restricted, like in Focus, we can go in Focus teachers, I don't know what parents can see on their end besides what's going on, but some of us can go into focus and look at this. They have all kind of charts and graphs that you can look at various data and focus. I don't know how that, works for the community, people that don't work in the district, but we can go into focus and look at a lot of different things. Because it's a tool for us for various trainings and, classes that, it was helpful for me for my ESOL endorsement that I just not spoke about. Yeah, I didn't have to call anyone. I was able to go into focus and find what I needed.
Megan, I heard you say that you wanted to make a motion for strengthening the district's data capacity.
I can wait till the end, I know that
Okay,
we wanted to go around, but that, I just wanted to,
okay,
I'm writing it down.
perfect, thank you. Brianne?
I think I just have a question. I know that there are ESOL strategies, but is there a defined program that is being implemented with Fidelity? Or is it just the strategy stuff?
When I took that class, they gave me this book and it just there are certain like graphic organizers. They're big on using graphic organizers. So as far as a set curriculum, like he was suggesting for those students, that information wasn't shared out. They only gave us like a book to refer to for specific accommodations for those students, for instructional purposes.
I guess a comment. One of my years teaching at Pelican, one of my first years there was they had an influx of students, there were about 8 students. So one of my blocks was just working with monolingual students, and I was able to speak to them in English and Spanish, back and forth. And then I also implemented Orton Gillingham, because I had a dyslexic student, I was trained, so I found that those things really helped them crack code.
See, that's another thing, they need a teacher that speaks more than one language. I think that would help certain students, they really, it helps for the culture, not just for the instructional, the instruction part, but the culture and them feeling, that someone is there that they can relate to, and understand.
Yeah, that's important, the culture.
Is it? Thank you. I don't have anything, maybe, I might revise maybe what you said, Mike, but I actually like the idea of taking a look at how we classify LY students when they move out of LY and why they're still being, I know from the state perspective, they still must be included in that number, but it's skewing the achievement gap problem. And I know that that's something that the state requires, is that number, that achievement gap number, but maybe internally in the district, we could have a different process about the way we look at that data, to get a clearer picture really of, to me, the achievement gap is gonna be much smaller if you pull those students out of what you're reporting to the state, so.
I don't want to misrepresent what was said, because I think it is really important, I don't want us to be going down with any reinforcing misconceptions. There are separate letter codes that not only show that when they at one time received services and no longer are receiving those services, there is a specific 2-letter designation for students. There's also for students who've just exited, they're in a monitoring phase. So there are enough fields to do it. The challenge that I saw as I unpacked it with them was, it wasn't formulated in such a way to analyze the things that you're talking about, like specific things like studying the exit rates. Because it's far more complicated. It's not doing it any justice, what I'm saying right now, because it is so layered. There's so much context. But yes, it's at the simplest level, just being dialed into, we can't take away the things we have to track and report to state. Those we have no agency to do anything like that. But certainly we can look at metrics we aren't looking at, things such as what you described about analyzing our exit rates, looking at that strata by different levels, which schools are really accelerating that piece. Where are we seeing this? Because each child is so different, and even the criteria upon which they're exiting, like you talked about older students exiting faster, well, the exit criteria for some of them is actually passing that test. So they're stuck in this particular conundrum because they can't pass this test. Now, whether it's because it's a language issue or because it's something else, like maybe, because we have a lot of students who speak English as a first language and can't pass that test. So imagine the student who get, when you're talking about overall rate around at 50%, 60%, that means a significant percentage of your students aren't passing that test, which is the same test these students are needing to exit. So that's what I'm saying, there are committees that can exit them based on other criteria, like let's say they see overwhelming evidence that a student is standing at that level, and their language skills clearly evident, they may exit them and then monitor them. So that's what I'm saying, it's much more complicated than a simple, they're either in this bucket or that, but I only mention that one because it's an unknown largely. If you talk to many, many people in our field, they may not even be aware that that's the case, that how it's being reported, and I just wanted to highlight that that was an awareness this committee brought forward, not that I wanted to oversimplify. I just don't want anyone, because I think if Dr. Rivera were to see it, I'd cringe for to think that we're taking this very complex body of work and distilling it down to a very simplistic path. But I do think, I just wanted to make sure I corrected that, if potentially any misconception around the coding of students, that it really does delineate some of the things you all have articulated.
But to me, what you've articulated, that's part of the problem. So when I do put my motion for it, it's gonna be even reevaluating what is the definition of exiting. Because if you're adding in extra stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the mastery of the English language, then now you've mixed apples and oranges, right? Because you're saying they know the English language, but they're not getting a good enough grade on an academic score, so someone else that's fluent in English isn't getting that grade, but they're not in the ELL program, and this person's still stuck being called an ELL student when really they're not. They know the English language. That's what should be.
And
we don't
you're
define that.
highlighting my biggest beef about when we use assessments to not measure the right thing. Because is that assessment measuring mastery of the English language or something else?
Right, and not only that, but like even if you break that down, every culture is different. You know, the way that a Puerto Rican speaks Spanish is very different than Mexico and various other languages. So I mean, is one accelerating quicker than another?
The only thing that I have to keep us moving along, and I have to figure out a way to word this so that it is specific to this particular issue, because it's something that has been challenging me for several years with regard to the strategic plan, is when the board hears from individual departments, similarly to the way we have heard from 2 departments here in this committee this year, and Mr. Dotage even shared that he used to the same presentation, same thing with our ELL folks. One of the things that I would like to see is specific strategies that departments are using to meet those indicators, because I think that speaks to transparency, not only for the board, but also for the community. And to me, it's very difficult after the fact to say, okay, well, we didn't meet this indicator. And then for the board and administrative leadership to say, well, why? What did you try? You know, and now let's think about what you could try next year. So before you get to that point where you're reporting out not meeting indicators, if you have an understanding of what the specific strategies were that each department is going to use to try and achieve that measurable goal, then I think it would just help with transparency and also probably decision-making by the board. So I'm not sure how to word that, but I'm gonna keep going. So Bill?
I'm gonna pass.
Yolanda?
Okay, again, from the teacher's point of view, it's just so much different from when I first started teaching intensive reading, and I know, and I've also, ever since I've been a teacher, had the opportunity to teach an English language arts class. But for the ELLs, it's like I said, so much different, and I felt like I had so much more support in the classroom for those students that needed it, because I had a paraprofessional that spoke Creole, and I had a paraprofessional that spoke Spanish, and it was so much smoother. So I don't really know how to address that, besides that it's so much different now. We don't have that support in the classroom. The students don't have that support, and they feel that the pressure, like the testing. They say, I'm tired of the WIDA test. I don't want to take the WIDA test, you know. And it's just like, you know, you wonder why don't you want to take your test? It's time for you to shine, you know. Take your test, show what you know. But that's been the experience with those students, that some of them it's just like
Too much testing.
It's tedious, it's a tedious thing, and it's got too much testing, and they just don't wanna do it, if they're tired of it.
Thanks.
Could I ask you a question since you've got that first-hand experience? Is it, because the previous meeting, it really stuck with me, you kind of complained where virtually every kid in your class was an ELL student versus sprinkle cheese of proportion spreading it out. So, but if paraprofessionals help, now it raised the question to me, what is the better answer? So is it better to say no more than 20% of a class can ever be ELL students if it's a mainline class, which means now to their benefit, 80% of their fellow students are non-ELL students, so they are really being mainstreamed. Is that better? Or is it better to concentrate them, because then you can justify the additional cost of the paraprofessionals? So I don't know which is the better answer.
The class size definitely needs to be looked at. The solution, right now, I can tell you because I can only tell you from what I see with my students. I have students that work together well, and then that's another problem. I have students that need to translate for each other, and they're working, and it takes away from what they're learning, their own learning. And that's my major concern, the students that are able to learn on their own, and them having to help out with the students that don't speak English. It takes away from what they need to do. So class size, I think it needs to be looked at for those, you know, if there needs to be only a certain number of those students in a class, that might be a possibility.
Would
So remind me, is there
capping it at
ELL
20% be
tutors?
helpful?
Are there ELL tutors that these individuals can partner with? Or a multilingual, third-party multilingual agency or something of that nature that they can get additional support from?
Well, I think in
remember
our
if I-
presentation, we heard from the team, the various, you know, Title III funded
Right,
intervention programs, et cetera. It sounds like in what we heard in the presentation, those are school by school in a lot of cases.
okay, there's nothing uniform.
Yeah, I wanna be careful too when we talk about things like metrics, because, you know, when something rises to the level of a policy problem, first there has to be disagreement on how to solve the problem, and then it has to be solvable, and in this case, solvable with public funds, and then you have to demonstrate that it was solved. And so, right now, we're, you know, saying something like, would it help if we capped it at 20%? Well, we don't know that, because we haven't really, it's still kind of a disagreement about how, you know, what the problem actually is, and, you know, how we might solve it. So I think we have to be careful not to make recommendations with specific sort of numbers,
Because you do
right?
something and then it doesn't work, and then, the tutoring is a good suggestion though, because with the shortage of paraprofessionals and what have you, I think tutoring would be a good suggestion, especially for those students that need additional support and accommodations.
Do you have a motion that you would like to make, Yolanda, or do you want to wait until the rest of our committees had a chance to talk? Okay.
I'd like to go back and support what Mike said about how we look at ELL overall outside of the box that we're in. Obviously within the scope of what the regs and the guidelines and structures are now. I mean, as a former ELL student, multiple generations ago already, things were different. I mean, Mike and I talked last week, I learned English for a year separate, and then I was, you know, integrated into a classroom. And so I was way more successful than those kids that only got portions of it, a little at a time. So I don't know if this is something that this committee or this, you know, group can opine on or research. I'm not sure if this is within the scope of what we're doing here. But I think ultimately the goal we're trying to achieve is to make our kids successful. And so I think it's a critical discussion, and I think that within the guidelines stipulated by the government and getting our funding, we should relook at how we're doing this. I was very surprised, based on my experience, you know, many years ago. You know, it's so different now, and it doesn't seem to be effective, and especially for these poor teachers that are trying to teach I can't even imagine.
Yeah, but I gotta say, at Okemie, the students are very cooperative for the most part, you know, you have to be polite and ask them if, you know, it's okay, if they feel comfortable with helping another student, but a lot of times when they, you know, they're feeling stressed about their grades and they need to get their grades, they wanna focus on themselves, and it becomes frustrating.
Thank you. Lucinda?
I would agree, I was an EL student, and it was the same. We were separate for a year, and then learned, you know, English, Spanish, try to get up to speed as much as we could, and then incorporated, and, you know.
Are there, is there still, there's no dual language programs in the district right now, Ken?
It was very helpful because
The
we were
last
there
one
for
that
culture.
where I don't think it's operational anymore, I think they
Okay.
did away with it, but it's certainly, and again, there's so many and it's
Yeah.
really layers of strategies. There's the
Mhm.
intensive piece where you have paraprofessionals doing direct translation services, you have I mean, there's just so many things. Then there's the regular teachers who are using strategies like what you mentioned about visuals, using more graphic things that a person, the language barrier is not gonna impede in order for a student to access. It's so complicated, there's so many things to it, but in terms of what I've heard was, you know, really engaging in what are all the best practices and the most effective implemented strategies, maybe not just here, but in other places too, because we're not the only ones, we may be dealing with one of the highest proportions of increases, but that doesn't mean we're the only ones dealing with this, and there's no, you know, back to your data piece, that's one of the sad realizations I had, was there isn't a lot of good data coming down the state pipeline even, but there are plenty of districts, and the data's out there, and with the fields that are available, there is definitely some opportunity to really distill what's really working significantly, but that's gonna be a big body of work. It's not something that we're gonna fix right in this moment, but it just great, I as a person who, I love hearing the conversation, it's fantastic, and there's definitely a lot of improvement opportunity. In terms of stating the specific motion though, you know, I think what I can assure you is even if you don't devise the perfect motion, I'm here, and I'm a district staff. I'm not just, this is, you know, yes, you exist for the board advisory, but I'm hearing it. It's certainly on one of my top issues. It's certainly impacting student achievement, as you saw. Our student achievement data, we have one of the very highest in the entire state in terms of increased population. So there's definitely a vested interest in getting to the bottom line solutions. So even if you don't figure out exactly what you want the verbiage to be, there's going to be, I'm taking a lot of what you've heard and distilling it so I can bring it back to Dr. Bernier and our team as well. So just know, don't feel too much pressure that you have to get all your motions down exactly. That's part of the benefit of having a staff liaison here is I'm all about this too, so.
You just gave me a great idea for a motion, but Christie. Christie hasn't had an opportunity to share yet, so let's let her do that first.
So I would say what you said in the last meeting really struck with me about having to, and it's all around the student ratios and the class sizes, is really the need to ask for help when those ELL students become in the classroom. You know, again, I think Smail said, I'm sort of like, how do you solve that problem? You know, one thought for me was really around, instead of setting a data or a metric point, you know, really setting that bar of when you're gonna get those paraprofessionals in the classroom. You got a class size of 20, maybe 5 is too many that you need to get that, sort of automate that process where you've got that paraprofessional in the classroom. You know, they shouldn't have to wait and ask for those additional resources. So that was really my one on that, of, you know, sort of trying to problem solve that. My second is, it probably stuck with me the longest following the presentation, was around the gap of the FTE students, right? What happens and the incoming students in the summer that aren't registered, that aren't anywhere. We've got a huge population that continue to come. If I'm not mistaken, I believe they said 40 or 50 a week. You know, we've got, 6-8 weeks of summer? I should know that, I don't. You know, that's hundreds of students that there's a gap there, that they're gonna be in community without gaining some education. So, you know, my thoughts are increasing those community resources for the ESOL students, for the ELL students, sort of getting some summer education in for them and really engaging the community. I know that was in the presentation. It's one of our KPIs to really increase community, so that would definitely be one of my recommendations. I hesitate to even mention. So earlier we talked about, testing for the right things. And I think about these students that are coming in a test year, right? In those test years, you're really testing their understanding of the English language because they're required to take it in English and not their understanding. And I understanding that a lot of that's out of our control, it's legislated on the language pieces, but really driving home the importance of a gap year, a free year, a pass, whatever, not test, but maybe to legislate for something within their, within their native language for a year, a 6-month period. I know it didn't take long to figure out where that lies, and that's not with this group, but, certainly it was important to me, so I think those would be my big points.
Thank you. Mike, I know you have a motion. I do too, so go ahead.
I'll try this. So my motion would be that while legislatively, it sounds like we are required to track ELL achievement, but that as a district, we focus our primary priority as exit timeframe. Time to exit as being the top priority for ELL students. And the second part of the motion would then be to evaluate, do we have flexibility on what constitute exit, or is that also state legislated? Because it sounds like the exit criteria is flawed now. Is that state legislated?
We don't develop, the exit criteria is, what's uniform, it's not even just at the state level, but even from a federal standpoint, there's a significant piece of this. So it is, the exit, like all of our exit criteria, that isn't something that we just decide willy-nilly, like that is absolutely how people do it. Now that each state is responsible for developing a multitude of tools and how they go about doing that, and we have that in our state. You heard WIDA testing earlier, we have the FAST assessment, which is a standardized assessment that we use. But I do think that even in spite of not, I'm trying to honor what you're saying here, so what I'm hearing is about the exit rate. That is a really important data element to be transparent about, to build improvement rates around. See, the problem of making it, just to push on it a little bit, Mike, is if the goal is just to get people out of the services, it's potentially a support system, similar to what ESE students receive in IEP. It's designed to tailor the support system, so it's not just a blanket, everyone gets the same thing. The services can be very much unique to the student. So taking services away potentially means you're taking away a dictionary that may help. So even though students passing, they're enough to exit the criteria, they've done enough to get to this level, that standard may be pretty low, and maybe some of those services can be very helpful to them if the committee decides. That's why they have committees that make those decisions, a LEP committee, so that it's more thoughtful around the entire picture. They're looking at multiple data points and making that piece, but they are looking at standardized criteria. They are all forced to come to the table and look at certain specific things in order to make that exit decision. So mandating that we want to try, I wouldn't want to influence a committee that exited all else. I think that it's a worthy point to say that we should be tracking that and looking at the effectiveness of programs that we're utilizing, whether it's, how effective are the strategies we're implementing, and I think that would be a fantastic criteria to be helping to assess the fidelity of your programming, to say, how did that summer program work for us? How's that school? That's powerful. I just don't want us to pigeonhole ourselves to something that isn't really operational. It's not gonna be feasible because when you push it in a more nuanced understanding, it's not gonna hold muster.
So I would be fine with whatever we can push as far as we can push it, because to me, it's the ELL, by definition, these are kids that don't know English, right? So the solution is we teach them English, and then there is no such thing as an ELL student if every student knows English. So somehow, whatever it would take to say, without getting rid of any of these other support programs, how can we prioritize in saying, well, one of the best metrics is how do we push the mastery of the English language as a top priority?
Maybe creating programs like the summer program, or making a recommendation to look into a summer program or something like that to help them get a little bit more proficient, which might include, ELL tutors, or I don't know, some type of multilingual channel that we can tap into where they can get additional resources if they are not getting enough during the classroom time, so they're not having to push other people into the classroom.
Okay. Since Mike, you started to make a motion, let's continue with that process. So,
I had my hand up already.
oh, I apologize, I didn't know we were in discussion yet.
We are. How about something as simple as, the motion is to reevaluate the ELL assessment and process? It's kind of generic and open-minded.
No, it's too generic.
Too generic.
This is the point of focusing on mastering the English language. That's the secret sauce. Focus on the mastery of the language.
Here, okay, since I don't know if I should call for a second on Mike's motion, since we're, I think I need to do that since you made the motion.
Well, make it again. Make your motion one more time.
So the motion is to look at reassessing the data that is collected around the ELL students to ensure that there is a focus on mastery of the English language and being able to exit the ELL program. So not to the exclusion of other things, but that is, that we put the metrics in place, that becomes a primary objective.
Okay, Misty, did you get the
Could you
motion?
do that a little bit slower for me?
Maybe-
He's working on it.
Yeah, cause I,
He
yeah.
got so you
Because
can
you're gonna
start
be able to word it in a way that is not gonna get immediately shot down as being a process.
So look at reassessing the data on the ELL.
With a focus on English proficiency and being able to exit the LL program.
Thank you.
Is there a second? Tamara's the
I'll
second.
second.
Is there discussion on this motion? So I have one thing, Christy, I see you looking.
I don't know, and that was a lot.
So my thought is that I think making the focus on the English language is not necessarily going to solve exiting LY status, which sounds, what your motion sounds like that's what you're trying to achieve. And so I don't think that I fully agree with the language in the motion for that reason. I think there's more to student success for ELL students beyond focusing on only learning the language. And so,
But by definition, isn't that the only thing that's making them an ELL student?
but it is not by federal legislation the only thing that is exiting them out of that status.
It is also academic achievement too, excuse me. It's not just the mastery of the language, because in the long run, they're gonna have more than one language that they're proficient in. The exiting is the goal regardless of whether they, master the language or not, whether they're fluent in whatever language it is. It's an academic achievement. That's, again, my major concern for some students. Is like I have several students that speak no English.
Yeah, I think that the issue that I have is that that motion makes the assumption that if a student could speak English perfectly, they would pass standardized assessments, and that's not the case. We know that's not the case from the data that we have. So saying that if an ELL student learns the English language, they will exit out of the program and be successful is not accurate. Because if that was the case, all of our English-speaking students would be doing that. So that's the challenge that I have. And there's a motion and a second on the floor, so we're gonna have to vote on it no matter what, unless you want to.
Why don't we just, you two folks have already done this, you've been there, done that. Weigh in on from your personal experience, if you don't
For
mind, if you
me-
don't mind sharing.
No, not at all. For me, I totally agree with Mike. The ELL program is to make you proficient in English, to then be able to move on and, accomplish what you need to accomplish. So all of these specific things that students have to meet, they all have to meet it.
Yeah.
Outside of the ELL program. So the ELL program to me focuses strictly on English proficiency. And then like every other student, they would have to then meet the other criteria.
I
That's
think
the way
this
I
makes
see it,
sense.
right?
Mhm.
That's the way I see it, just because, listen, I've never been the best math student, so ELL did not help me with my math. I really had to struggle through school with my math, with my English proficient, but I was already English proficient, which got me out of my program, into the classroom, and then I had to duke it out like the rest of the students and figure my stuff out.
No, don't feel bad, because I have several students, that's another thing, they come in there, they have a class that's more important than Read 180, and I'm struggling with math, so.
Yep.
I need to do my
Everyone has a
math.
strength and a weakness, I mean, that's just universal, but I think that, you know, if you better understand the language, it does make it a little easier. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that, obviously, we want them, because the whole goal is around increasing student achievement. So how do we align what you're saying to that as a
Yeah,
goal?
if academic achievement is baked into this extra criteria, which, my opinion, which is worth nothing, is flawed, but it is what it is, I would still say the first tool in their toolkit to making achievement is being proficient in the language. So first and foremost, if we focus on language proficiency, that's only gonna help them. It may not solve it for everybody, so you could end up with someone who's totally proficient in English and never exits the program because they're not gonna achieve the academic requirements because we tied two unrelated things together, which makes no sense that they got tied together, but they are. But if you're gonna give them one tool and one tool only, it's English proficiency is the first tool I would give them to be able to achieve that exit criteria.
Can I just ask a
When we're, Christy, go ahead, because we're discussing his motion, which has been seconded, so once the discussion is over, then we have to vote on that before we go to anything else. So do you have a discussion based on his
Yeah.
motion? Okay, good.
What is there a metric or is there a test that measures whether they have English proficiency? Like, is there a specific test for that piece?
Is it reading scores, is it like?
WIDA, the specific WIDA test is the one that is designed to assess.
They have iReady, they have WIDA, yeah, iReady does that
Specific
also.
language.
So are there scenarios where they've met that, they're good at it, but they're not doing well in this other category, so therefore they can't?
Right, so early on, you'll notice that exit rates are much faster at K1, 2. That's because they don't have that second assessment. They are strictly being exited based on WIDA results. And that's not to say, it doesn't also necessarily say though that it's because they're acquiring language. It gets more complicated. As they get older, the nature of the language is more complicated as well. So that is a big piece. The exit rates are extremely high very early on, but that's because that's the method. Now, when I was talking to Dr. Rivera, she actually shared with me, like, I was trying to give her different scenarios of, okay, what if, I had a student who, what would, if I were to take an English-speaking student and give them the WIDA test,
Right.
somebody who's never spoken English as a second language, they spoke only as their first language, how would they do on that assessment? She was able to give me what their performance levels would be. So that's the idea, is you're trying to control for exactly what Mike was concerned about, but it does get, when they're tied together, and the idea is exactly back to, Yolanda's point. It's not good. We want the kids to pass the test. And we don't want to strip away a resource potentially for them to help them, that this may come in handy if they get to use that dictionary. That may be the only thing they use. And they may never use it, but they're going to like, wait a second, I know English pretty well, but I don't know what this word means. But I know that's what it means. Boom, I can use that. That's a resource. They may never have a translator. That's what I'm saying. Every student is very different. And so that would allow them to continue to use that resource, potentially, if it's written for their.
Yeah, because when they get to a certain point, they don't want that code following, and a lot of times, that doesn't really register until they get to a certain age about that, code. And once they lose that, status, they won't receive those accommodations. So they'll be.
But that's wonderful, I didn't
That-
know we
that's
had
the goal.
this WIDA thing, so
That's
we should track that through middle school and high school, we should have that data to know, well, how much of the problem is the English proficiency versus we're just forcing this academic standard that even native-born English speakers don't achieve anyway, so.
So they lose resources if they're pulled out of that status.
I would prefer to say that the committees have to make those decisions, similar to IEPs, it's a good parallel.
Yeah.
That this student really doesn't need this. We don't think that they no longer, this resource really isn't necessary for them. And that is a discretion of that LEP committee. But they are in monitoring, so after you're out, so I decide, Missy, you know what, you don't need this service anymore, we don't think you need this. But for 2 years, we're watching Missy, we're looking at other results, we're looking at all the other data to say, well, maybe we need to pull Missy back in again. Those are the kind of things that you can do. That's why it's such a complicated conversation. I hope I didn't contribute to any misconceptions on it.
No, not at all. Okay.
So there's a motion on the floor and there's a second. So we need to vote on it, or, Mike would need
Can we
to
hear it again?
withdraw his motion. So Misty, could you read the motion?
The second one you did, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Look at reassessing data on ELL with focus on English proficiency and exit the program.
Okay. All in favor of Mike's motion, say aye or raise your hand. Opposed? Abstain. Okay, so it looks like the motion passed. Okay, so does anybody have another motion that they would like to make?
Are we able to do a motion to create programs surrounding student achievement for EL students that would look into what does a summer program look like for them, maybe, additional resources that we could look into, whether that's tutors, multilingual channels, things that, it's not gonna be a huge expense to the district, but that might help bridge the gap sooner. And additionally, maybe see if there's a way to even go a step further than that. Again, I don't know if it's even possible, where there is not a student to teacher ratio, but somewhat, and not just EL students, but even in ESC students. I've seen that happen in many cases where one teacher out of 20 students, they might have 6 students that are ESC, ESL, and that does, as a full classroom, we're looking at achievement, could potentially weigh that classroom and move forward if you have that many students that need that extra attention. And yes, they have a paraprofessional that can support that, but sometimes it's not enough.
So, a couple of things. I think that idea got really big, right? So we want to stay, which is not a bad thing, but I think we want to stay focused on the ELL students and student achievement, because that's the presentation we had, and that is at least some of the data that we got. So, also, I would caution us to make recommendations about specific programming. What we could do, however, is make a recommendation to ask the board to ask the superintendent to explore alternative ways that ELL students could have pathways to success. And some of those might include those types of things that you described, but I think that having the board asking the superintendent to explore what those ways might be would be a better process. So if you want to make that motion, you certainly could.
Then I didn't make that motion. What she said.
So the recommendation of our committee at this point is to ask the board to ask the superintendent to explore alternative pathways for ELL students to achieve success. Or we might even say to achieve let's say success. That's shorter, Misty. Do you want to reread the motion so the committee can hear it again?
Just a minute.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you want it that broad, or would you want to focus on summertime as being any summer-related
I'm
programs?
kind of open, again, there's a bunch of different pieces to that. There's, like I mentioned, maybe, the staff to student ratio, there's summer programs. If he explores that, then I, obviously have faith that he'll do whatever avenues he needs to with the board to look at different types of options available to him.
One of the things that we could include as the board asking the superintendent to explore is maybe to form a committee that includes, all of our stakeholders, and that would be parents, ELL students, and teachers, as well as district staff. Sorry.
No, okay, so you want to, because I had it backwards at first, you want to ask the board, to ask the superintendent to explore different ways for ELL students
To achieve
to
success.
achieve success.
That's my motion. I think that I have faith that if the board decides to take that recommendation and ask the superintendent to do that, that he would then, put together an exploratory committee of some
Mhm.
sort.
And that could be, IE, whatever.
Is there a second for that motion?
I will second that.
Okay, so now we have 15 minutes left. I'm gonna open it for discussion. Does anybody have any thoughts about that motion?
I agree, I think all of those things are great. I think any resources that we can provide to these students is a great pathway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
And especially if we're looking at, ELL, because I think if they're in a good place, that will in general help the other students that are not ELL students in the same classroom, because now they're up to speed a little bit faster, because they have resources that they can, go to if they need to.
The reason I asked about summer is that's the one time you can try to catch up where the train's not moving, You don't, because during the school year, there's academic stuff you need to work on, where the summertime's the one time you can locate, how can I use this time to catch up?
Yeah, you can keep that going, that's an ongoing thing, with the teachers and the students. If you have something going on in the summer with that student and, get the parents involved, they want their students to continue with those services, that can be an ongoing thing as they make progress and keeping track of their progress. Yeah, because like you said, you all did it for a year, a summer wouldn't be enough.
No.
Yeah, the summer wouldn't be enough time. They would need more time than just the summer.
Yeah, but the summer programs just help get caught up, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
To help them with, where they're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second on the floor. I'm gonna call for the vote. Misty, can you reread the motion, please?
Ask the board to ask the superintendent to explore different ways for ELL students to achieve success. That the one I'm reading?
Yes.
Okay.
All in favor, raise your hand or say aye, so Misty knows who voted
Aye.
where. Opposed? Abstain.
You're abstaining from your own
Well,
motion?
no, I'm sorry.
Don't do that.
I- Yes. I thought because I put it forth that I
You
couldn't
can
vote
vote
on
on
it.
it, yeah.
Okay.
So you're yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we had no no's and no abstains, right? Just, okay. All right, so let's go back to the agenda. Thank you for a fantastic conversation this evening. So it looks like we have 5, if I'm counting correctly, recommendations for the board from this committee for this academic year. So we have really done some work this year, I feel like, in our short year. So thank you to all of you for your commitment to this committee. I don't think that we have any public comment, and so does anybody have anything for the good of the order? Okay, so I have one thing, Ken, and that is, it sounds like the strategic plan refresh work is ongoing through at least June. And so is there something that is expected from this committee in terms of contributing to that work? Because this is our last scheduled meeting of the academic year.
Thank you, Dr. Strick. Yes, so just to clarify, what you're going to be receiving, this was just kind of to introduce you to what has happened and what's happening. They're going to be sending you, as a member of the CSI committee, a survey that is very specific to get your reaction to some of the priorities that are emerging based on the themes you heard from the various different groups, whether it's teachers, students. They're trying to synthesize all that information they got from the board, from the superintendent, from the chiefs, from the different stakeholder groups in the survey, to put forward a customized survey for our board advisories. You would receive that as a member of this committee. The ask would be that you complete it, that you give a thorough response, anything qualitative you can write, just leave it out there, put whatever you can, because they're gonna do theme analysis on all that qualitative as well as the quantitative data they're gonna put those pieces, and then just stay tuned, because you're gonna see that's it'll hopefully be better audio than the first half of the first meeting. But yes, that is the ask for this group, and also for, there's a few other board advisories, so that's a specific ask.
Great, thank you. And then the last thing is, if your term expires this year, I encourage you to reapply by the deadline, which I believe is usually at the end of June, right, Misty? I think it's June.
And it changed, so this year, I'm so glad that you mentioned this, because I put it on the bottom of your agenda, because I was asked, is Mary Rader, you want to stay on Mary's good side? She told me, she said, Ken, please remind them, July 1st. So here's how this works. If you would please wait until July 1st, traditionally you would get it done early, but in this particular case, there's a new application form. So if you are a person who is finishing your second term, and theoretically you'd be done, but you have the ability to reapply, as people have done, if you want to do that, wait until July 1st, use the new form, so please wait, and then, then you have 2 more years to keep the conversation going. For those people that are here that are just finishing their first year of their term, you're automatically, unless you tell us otherwise that you don't want to continue on, please let us know that. But you don't have to do that today, but you please communicate that intention that you don't want to fulfill your second term so they could try to fill your seat during that time period. So that is, and I put it in here so I wouldn't forget, and of course I still forgot, but it's in the agenda, so thank you, Dr. Stark, for bringing that up.
You're welcome. So now, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Tamara, that's you.
You're making the motion to adjourn the
Okay.
meeting.
Anybody seconding?
I'll second
Okay,
that.
Mike seconding. All in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting? Have a great summer, everyone.